Hello, welcome to After the Tower, a podcast about change and transformation. My name's Toland and I'm the host, and I'm happy to be with you in this moment. I am excited to share the episode with our guest today, Dani Cirignano, who I met, like many other folks, through the Living Your Design program. And we talked a little bit about, she had a couple of stories that she might want to tell, but we decided to talk about her decision to stop drinking and the recovery process from that. And I also stopped drinking like a year and a half, 2 years ago ish now. And I really got a lot personally out of the conversation. I think she has really integrated the experience and integrated what that has meant to her, what alcohol meant before, and what recovery has meant now. And I just helped, she kind of really articulated things in a way that I kind of helped me solidify my understanding. So I'm really excited to hear you all listen to it. And for some context, Dani is a 1-3 emotional manifestor. You can connect with her at joinselfmade.co and joinselfmade on Instagram. And you can connect with me at tolandlawrence.com. And I'm excited to hear what y'all think of the episode. All right. Hi, Dani. Welcome
Hi,
to
Colin.
Hi. Welcome to After the Tower. I'm so happy to have you here and excited to dig into a little bit of the story you wanted to tell. Like most of the folks that have been on my previous episodes, we met through the Living Your Design course. And when I put out that call, you responded, and you have like an interesting story to tell, and I'm excited to get into it. So, but yeah, how are you doing today?
Doing good. I've been looking forward to this. I've definitely been sitting with the tower, and really kind of being with those moments in my life and the quality of that. And my week has been full of a lot of like to do type stuff. And so seeing this on my calendar on a Friday, I've been looking forward to it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess let's start off like what like as you've been contemplating, because the tower can mean so many things to so many different people. Like what is your perspective on that and those tower moments?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I'm 41 years old. I think now with the benefit of retrospect, looking back on my life and the many tower moments that I've had, and knowing that I'm going to have many more, hopefully, I get to live a long life and full of lots of things, including tower moments. I think it's not something that I fear or shy away from. Um, and there's always this feeling of like, okay, this that had to happen, and it actually happened right on time. And I think another piece of the reflection has been what have been the kind of overt, maybe even observable, point toable tower moments, and then what have been the more kind of internal rearranging that's also happened over the course of my life, and certainly in the past 8 years.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really beautiful reflection. And I think I love what you're saying about, with time you realize like change is inevitable and upheaval is a part of being alive. These moments where things that we had relied on break down or they fall apart, when they happen to you, you know, because there can be a desire to see that as, oh, this is bad. This is what shouldn't be happening in life. But the more you live, the more you realize, no, this is part of it. This is all part of it. The ups and the downs. This is kind of the nature of what it is to be human. And as you say, if you're lucky enough to live like this, you'll experience more. And that's actually from a certain perspective a beautiful thing, even if it's unpleasant at the time. So I think that's a really lovely reflection. And that's really what I'm trying to put out there, and is this frequency of like, we all go through these kind of moments. It's a human experience, and we can get through them. And we can
Mm-hmm.
find some lessons and understanding. It doesn't always appear in that moment. It's something that can come over time if you're willing to trust in it. And so the tower moment you kind of brought to me, I mean, you brought a couple, but one that I wanted to dig in with you is because I think it's relatable to a lot of people these days, is the decision that you made to quit drinking. You
Mhm.
know, this is a habit that's very deep in American culture, and a lot of people struggle with this habit. And yeah, I'm really curious. Yeah, like if you could share, and I also, quit drinking about a year, little over a year and a half ago. So it's related to me too. Yeah, so I would love for you to talk about what your relationship with alcohol was before you decided to quit. What was it like, and what were some of the moments kind of building up to that decision that looking back now, you could see that there was a there it wasn't working and there was a desire to change, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. So I quit drinking September 2017. So it'll be 8 years this coming September. And my relationship with alcohol prior to that it was never uncomplicated. I grew up with, like, in my early childhood till I was 13, it wasn't even really part of my consciousness because my parents didn't
Mm,
really drink at home, and my dad never did. And so my understanding of like what alcohol was, it was like, oh, my mom makes margaritas at family parties, and my grandfather like has a little shot of Jack Daniels after dinner. But if I had been around drunk people up to 13, I wasn't clocking it.
mm,
And then there was a shift that happened when I was 13 where my dad, who I didn't know had had an alcohol problem, he started drinking again after a long period of abstinence. And my dad, bless him, but he has the type, he wouldn't even have to be drunk and his personality would shift. And so I had this
mm,
really strange understanding of what alcohol was, because on one hand it was like everyone was doing it and that's like what adults do, and then on the other hand there's this person in my life who is behaving in this really horrible way and none of the adults around me are like acknowledging it. And so getting into college, in high school, I smoked a ton of weed and I was really afraid of alcohol.
mm,
And then because of my dad, and then in college, like I went from smoking weed like almost all day every day to feeling super paranoid. And that's when my drinking started to increase. And because, I had all this stuff inside of me that I didn't know what to do with, big emotions, highly sensitive kid. I mean, I can use this language here. I'm a emotional manifestor. Like I I lived in a family where like any emotion outside of like happy or angry wasn't really welcome, and I didn't know what to do with myself, and so I started self-medicating.
right.
And when weed went away, alcohol stepped in. And, for the most part, by and large, I was drinking normally. And that's in air quotes because I don't see it that way anymore. Um, but I was drinking, the way my peers were. But then there were like these shadowy aspects that would come in where, it'd be a night like any other night I'd go out and something would shift and like these aspects of myself would emerge that terrified me in the light of day.
Mm,
And this was the thing that had me know that I the way that alcohol like worked in my system was different, and there was like a shadowy darkness to it. And I kind of like related, to that part of myself. I called it the void. I felt like there was this like emptiness inside of me, and there'd be nights where I'd go out and I'm like, ooh, anything could happen. And it was almost like this urge inside of me to like go, I don't even know what. But then, by the light of day, I'm like practicing all this yoga and like studying to be a yoga teacher and sort of had this idea of who I was, that, and a lot of what was causing me pain was seeing myself, believing myself, so deeply desiring to be a certain type of person, and then my behavior being so counter to that. And so in between those two extremes was, shame, self-loathing, confusion, like, wow. And so, slowly over time, um, like I just sort of, I think maybe the thing that I'll speak to is the thing that's like a surprise to me now, and I wish someone would have said to me earlier is like, you can opt out. Like, you don't have to do this. But I like so had it in my head that like I had to figure out, I had to figure it out. I had to figure out how to drink normally, and like that would make me a normal person. And if I could just stumble upon the right sort of configuration of something, then I'd be able to like drink normally. And um, I have a practice of, I do morning pages. I have since 2009. I have stacks and stacks and stacks of journals that are really boring to revisit. But when I first quit, I went back and I was like, oh, I'm curious about like how drinking showed up. And it was so pervasive, and like years and years and years of writing of like stressing out over it, knowing something was wrong, but feeling like I would anyway. So then in 2000, March of 2017, the day before my 33rd birthday, I get hit by a car. Driving my Vespa, get hit by a car. I was I was okay. Um, and it was, kind of right after the first Trump inauguration. I was like in a relationship that was like okay on the surface, but not that great underneath. In the next 6 months, my drinking tipped back up.
Mm.
I was sort of rehabbing injuries and sort of like stuck feeling kind of shitty in my body. And then September 2017, I went to a friend's barbecue and just got really wasted, woke up the next day, soul shattering hangover. And I knew, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'd taken plenty of breaks before. 3 weeks, 4 weeks after that, I just knew that I was done. It was like a switch flipped inside of me and I was done. And it was kind of a shock because it wasn't something that I was thinking would happen or was planning for, but it happened. And after that moment, that's when my life just like really shifted. And it, in some ways, feels like after years and years and years of feeling like I was just sort of tolerating things,
Mm.
I emerged out of that, and like I started to feel like I was having more of a say in how my life was going, and not just that I was like treading water constantly.
Mm.
So I'll just maybe pause there. That's the sort of like how it
Yeah.
happened.
Um, there's so much in that, and there's so much that I want to dig into. And just like one thing that you really articulated that like I've never really fully understood. And it was just like, it was cool to hear that reflected back because I really relate to that. Like, I also really picked up on my drinking in college, and that was normal. Like, that getting blackout drunk was 1000% normal back then. I think these days it's not the thing as much, but like, that's what people did. But also, like, I totally, when you talk about like going out and like wanting something magical to happen, even though I knew every time, like, nothing magical would happen. Like, I would, hook up with some random person or throw up somewhere or do something that would embarrass me. But I kept going back to that well. And this dichotomy that you kind of put up of this, like, this yoga teacher, this light persona, and then the darkness of the alcohol is so striking. And I really do relate to that. I feel like um, it felt like the only container for a certain kind of darkness that I had inside myself, but it was like a terrible container. And it's so funny. Like, there's so much. I'm sorry. I'm just like reflecting back, but I also did the morning pages for a while, and I was looking back recently to back when I was drinking, and so many of the morning pages were like, I so regret getting drunk last night. I regret everything I said. I regret all this stuff. I regret everything I did. And I didn't change at that point, but
it was like I was really shocked to go back and be like, wow, I didn't realize like drinking was such a big deal to me back then. Because I never really considered myself having a problem, but because it was other people were doing it, you
Mm.
know? But there was something unhealthy about it. There was
Yeah.
something that it was meeting. And yeah, like and it's interesting you talk about this change that happened after you stopped drinking and opened up the agency in your life. But like what, you were drawn to the alcohol, you were drawn to that experience. You were drawn to something that didn't serve you, but it served something. Like what was, if you look back, like what was that thing that it was serving for you, do you think? Or what
Mm.
was it giving you?
Alcohol.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, just hearing you reflect back to me the thing of like the dichotomy of like the light Dani versus the dark Dani. Like if I'm really honest, like I can conjure her in my mind. It was like this sort of like cigarette smoking, late night drinking, whiskey drinking, like 20 into my 30 something who could like match everyone drink for drink and
Mm,
kind of like it was like this vampiric underworld that I felt like I was a part of, being out late in the city and like traipsing around. And I can conjure that version of in my head. And if I'm really honest, like there was a part of me that liked that,
yeah.
I liked that sort of shape shifty version of myself who could kind of be whoever I wanted to be. And the thing with booze and other addictions too, and just to be clear, I'm not sober, but I don't fuck with alcohol. Like there's a payoff until there isn't. And so this drug initially gave me freedom from anxiety. Oh my
Mm,
God, the anxiety that I had from a very young child. It gave me a place to sort of release, the kind of intensity that I was constantly holding within myself. It made me an extrovert. Who knew I'm not actually an extrovert, but I would drink myself into extroversion. In my mind, I don't think this is actually an accurate read, but in my mind, I was this charming sort of life of the party type person. And I liked that until, right, it's like, okay, then suddenly I tipped, and the benefits stopped outweighing the shit.
yeah.
Waking up in the light of day, and to your point, reflecting on the night before, what I could remember of it, and being like horrified by the things that I had said yes to, um, what I had been up to. And then, of course, as I aged, the hangovers got worse and worse.
Yeah.
And even if the physical effects lasted, let's say, a day, I was finding that even if I hadn't gotten drunk, the emotional mental effects, it would put me into like such a low because I knew there was something, it was taking me away from myself,
Mm.
and I think like the way that I've started to understand it now is a lot of what I was doing was like, I was like sort of terrified of that dark version of myself.
Mm.
I can kind of feel it right now as we're talking.
Yeah.
Like I was terrified of her because I felt absolutely at her mercy and like totally out of control when she was around. And that was the thing. I had a narrative around that there was something wrong with me, that I'm inherently fucked up, and like there's this void inside of me. And it wasn't until I, slowly over time started to move these two aspects of myself together and find ways to become a more integrated whole person that it started to relax because
Mm.
I was because it was something that I was trying to rid myself of rather than like bring in. And I don't know if you've ever seen The Never Ending Story, that movie.
And not since I was a little, I haven't seen it in a long time. I don't
It
really.
was it horrified me as a kid, but I was also like so super into it as a kid. It was one of the movies that I probably watched the most as a young child. But there's the hero, Atreyu, and he goes into this swamp and he's on his like hero's journey and he has to face that kind of wolf character, Gmork. And he's like, come for me. Like there's this moment where he's like, just come for me. And like, I feel like that's kind of what I had to go through. Like, come here. Like, I'm not going to run from you anymore. I have the chills. And yeah, so like the alcohol was a symptom. It wasn't the problem. There was this deeper thing inside of me of like, I was very disconnected from who I actually was. And I feel like the who I was had been sort of tamped down from such an early age that, I got to adulthood and I had no idea who I was. And that's been, when we talk about a tower moment, quitting drinking and like facing myself, like that has been, like I quit drinking in the first 6 months, year and a half after, I was like, oh, what the fuck am I? Like I felt like I had to like piece together this identity. And there's this saying, oh, we drink to take the edge off. Like I had taken so many edges off. I was just like a puddle on the floor. I'm like, who am I? What do I like? Who do I like spending time with? Like, how do I like spending my time? What's important to me? How do I find this more like cohesive identity and not just sort of be like, you know, shifting who I am based on who's in front of me? So um, it really kicked off like where I sit today is, I believe, maybe not only, but in great part due to making the choice to step away from that substance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that was beautiful. And I love that motif you brought forth of the hero confronting the monster. Like they talk about like the hero's journey it's like a psychological like form that all humans have. And I studied Jungian psychology for a while, and Jung talks about the shadow. We all have parts of ourselves that we consciously cut off and put into the shadow. But when we do that, when we push away parts of ourselves, they come back stronger in very strange, interesting ways. And only when we can confront the shadow and meet the shadow and integrate the shadow do we experience less of the, negative effects of the shadow. And like your story is such like a prime example of that. And I really relate to like for me, like drinking was never something I wanted to do alone. It was always about people and just dealing with the anxiety I felt around people, about feeling like I wasn't enough or I wasn't good enough. And I was, like suppressing a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings. And like I came out as queer a couple of years ago, and like I was suppressing a lot of that, like forcing myself to be straight, to be normal. Like alcohol helped me do that. And as you say, like alcohol was just a vehicle for me to suppress certain things about myself I wasn't ready to face, you know? Like that's what it was doing. Like, and as you say, like that wasn't the problem. The problem was that cutting off of parts of myself that needed to be faced and tended to, but I was scared of. And I think it's just like hearing you articulate that now has just like brought so much clarity to me in my story, because I hadn't totally understood it that way, because I never really felt like I had a problem, because I was kind of doing what everyone else was doing. And, but like looking back, like it was clearly compensating for something. And, yeah. And I think that there's many directions I could go, but I'm just going to leave it here and just let you pick up where you want to go from there. But I mean,
Well, I'm so happy.
yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I'm so happy you said the thing about like it was suppressing so many things that you maybe weren't ready to face. That's very much how I view this. When I'm a coach, and like the first couple of years that I was a full-time coach, I was working with folks who were early in recovery from alcohol. So I've heard hundreds and hundreds of stories. And I I know that I could not have quit a moment before I did. And part of why I did quit when I did is because I was ready. I was ready to start to face whatever the fuck I had to face. And so many people when they first start to, get into a conversation with themselves about the role alcohol is playing in their life or maybe another substance, there's usually so much shame wrapped up. And then we judge ourselves for not having made different decisions in the past. And I think it's very helpful and often healing to consider there was a reason why we were anesthetizing. And in some ways, I almost view it as like a protective mechanism until I was ready to do the deeper stuff. And I also believe it's unfair of me to judge the who I was at 21 with the consciousness that I have now at 41. It's not fair because I was doing the best that I could, that I knew to do. I was never intentionally trying to fuck myself,
Yeah.
And then another piece is, you're saying like, I don't think I had a problem. Like everyone around me was drinking similarly. Like, I think this is just like a good moment to name that addiction is a spectrum, and we don't even have to use that word like substance use. There's such a spectrum. And, we have folks who are maybe chemically dependent, and that's a more complicated, path out. But then there's so many of us who we just sort of have like this murky understanding of like what it is and why it's complicated. And I think a more helpful question instead of like, do I have a problem is this still adding more to my life than it's taking? And like, if the answer is no, it's not anymore, then you just open up some space for curiosity and like experimentation, rather than, you know, X equals, X plus Y equals Z. And that means I have to claim a label. Like I never did. I always have to caveat this by saying like I don't think there's anything wrong with 12-step recovery. I know it's helped many millions of people. It wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And I knew that. And I think that I actually maybe would have sought support earlier if I had known that I could have just opted out of that. But based on my dad's experience of like, seeing him come home with chips and just like the shame that I could feel radiating off of him, I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want to call myself an alcoholic. Like, who says I have to call myself that? Like, really. And so I think that's something that I always like to share when I'm sharing my story about this, is that you get to make the rules about what your recovery is. Just you, like, the path of recovery can be just as individual as every single person on the planet. You don't have to follow a playbook. You don't have to follow anyone else's rules. AA is made up. Like, it's okay if it doesn't work for you. If it does, great. So I always like to throw that in the mix as well, because I think it's important for people who maybe are starting to question things to know that you know better than what you need. You know better what you need than anyone else. And that's what you're having to discover. What do I need? Like what that's, not that thing anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I think so important, because as you say, like if people like, when we get into these moments where we think, oh, there's only this choice or this choice, I either keep drinking or do 12 step. Like when you're in that black and white, this or that thinking, it's so easy to get stuck. And I really appreciate this like call to people to think beyond that. What's going to work for you? And that question you brought up is like, is this helping me more than it's hurting me? Or that
Yes,
wasn't the
that's
exact
that's
phrasing.
perfect. Yeah.
Like that is such a lighter question. It's like, okay, like I can face that question rather than like, am I an alcoholic? That's a big, scary question, you know? And I think that that's such an important reflection. And so much of what you were talking about is de-shaming and de-shaming this whole process. And I feel like shame is such a, it's like a huge, I'm not going to speak. For me, it was such a huge block. And so I'm curious if you could talk about how do you invite folks to work with shame, and because it's like part of the cycle, and it's kind of the thing that keeps you in. So from your own experience or from your experience with working with people, I'd be curious.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first off, it's like, I think the first eventually it's like the work is getting to a place of self-forgiveness. And, I heard a quote once, and I've looked it up and I actually haven't been able to find for sure who it's attributed to. I think it's Jack Cornfield, but I'm not 100% sure. But someone said forgiveness is letting go of all hope for a different past. And I think that was something that I held really close because, what tends to happen for so many of us, and I'll speak from my own experience, is, I quit drinking and then there was a period of reckoning. And I don't think you can skip over that, where I had to sort of look back and realize, like, wow, I made certain decisions that, had a negative impact a lot of the time. And I spent, over a decade of my, life in shame, like in real profound shame and self-loathing. And yeah, things were happening along the way, but the kind of undercurrent was not good. It was like a deep self-neglect that was my kind of core thing. This profound sense of like lack inside of me. And so I think that, turning and facing that and really looking at it and just kind of being with it, and it's painful. And then I think, the process of it is, like I said earlier, it's like the slow kind of working on my thoughts to understand as more than just a thought experiment, but to really know that I couldn't have done it any different than I did.
Mm.
If I could have, I would have.
Yeah.
And it took me some time to get to that place of knowing that to be true and not just like saying it to myself, and really, again, understanding that I can't even judge who I was 6 months ago, the decisions that I made 6 months ago, because I am constantly changing and evolving and becoming and learning more. And my consciousness is constantly growing and being shaped and expanding. And that had me feel a lot more compassion toward myself. I think understanding, this is maybe the work that people are doing like in therapy. I haven't done a ton of therapy, but kind of going back and spelunking my past and understanding like, wow, I was a really highly sensitive, emotional kid and that wasn't fostered in my family. And that really had an impact on me,
Mm.
really had me like bury things within myself. And then finally, I remember, I didn't do 12 step, but I did end up plugging into a community of peers. I will say that in the almost 5 years now that I've been a coach, and sincerely like the hundreds of people that I've worked with who are dealing with alcohol stuff, if I were to name the one thing that it seems like has its stick for people versus the people who struggle longer, it's finding community. Other people who also don't drink, who you can like hang out with, be yourself with, and talk about like this shit with. I can't tell you how many times people would show up to a conversation with me, a coaching conversation, and just like the unburdening of things that they have never said out loud before because of that shame. It's like sometimes it was one conversation was all that people needed to like flip something to being received without like, oh, you have a problem, you're like you're sick, you have a disease. Like, I don't believe in any of that. But I remember for myself, like the first time there was something that I did, when I was drunk, wasted one night at like 2:30, I get kicked out of a car, in the middle of San Francisco because I was just talking shit. And they kick me out of the car. I'm like belligerent. I sit down at the bus stop. It's like, and they end up like smoking something out of a pipe with some guy. I have no idea who they are. Like, and like in my mind, I'm like 22, 23 at the time. That was the most horrible thing that I'd ever done.
Mm.
And I just knew that I would never. And I remember saying it out loud and just feeling that shame go away. Because I said it to someone who is just like me, this other person who, has a life and is just trying to be a better person who also struggles in this way. I was like, oh, I'm not inherently fucked up. Alcohol is an addictive substance and I got hooked, and there's nothing. It was like the first time that I really knew, like, oh my God, there isn't anything wrong with me. I'm a human. I'm having a human experience, and like alcohol is a drug. So I think those are the ways that I've known to help move the needle on shame. And then, of course, there's more like active practices like, cultivating self compassion and deeper self awareness and all these, really catching the critical voice and like pushing back on it a little. Yeah. But
Yeah.
shame's a big one, it's like, and there's like a density to it.
Oh yeah. It's like shame is sticky. Like I really feel
Yeah.
like it sticks to my body and it's like hard to rub off. It just sticks. But yeah, that is so well articulated and I really like the two pieces that really struck me. I mean all did, but the two pieces like you literally could not do better. If you could do better, you would have is so important and so true. And it's like there is like even when you said it, there was this part of me that was like, no, it's not true. Like there's this, no, you could have been better. But that's what is that serving? What is that doing in the moment? That's just making me feel worse. And how is that making me move towards the kind of actions and the kind of life I want to take? It's doing nothing towards that. It's just keeping me in that cycle. And it
And
is
the
objectively true, you know? Okay, go ahead.
and the question is also is like, whose voice is that?
Yeah.
Like, where the fuck does that come from? It's probably not you. It wasn't me. This narrative that I had that there's something wrong with me. That's not me. That was like family stuff, like telling me, whatever.
Right.
So yeah, it's like that deconditioning, like understanding like what is me and what is this like crazy ass filter that's like convincing me of something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like this because this culture wants us to become like a specific thing, you know? And so anything about you that's not like that in school in your family environment, that's going to be punished. And then
Yeah.
you come to understand and it can be punished in overt ways, but it also can be punished in very subtle ways, like being ignored when you have an emotional outburst or whatever, but then you learn that and then you kind of develop like, oh, when I behave in these ways, something's wrong with that. So there must be something wrong with me because there can't be anything wrong with the people in my life. They're my caretakers, they're my teachers, they're people who know more than me. Um, and it's so like about like in this culture, like there is like what we talk about in human design, like there is, and in capitalism and colonialism, all these systems, like it's like a violent forcing people to fall into a certain mold so that they can be good workers and good citizens, and like cutting off their individual spirit, which maybe is going too far. But the point I'm trying to make is that you're right. Like it's something that happens to you as a child, and then if you're lucky enough, you get the opportunity to detangle it as you get older and you get the opportunity to reclaim that parts of yourself that got cut off at a very early age. And again, that's not easy to do. And you're not always in a place where you can do that. And just like, as you say, like we need something to take the edge off that pain. We need something to take the edge off that pain. And I just really appreciate you saying that because it's so true. And it's simultaneously hard for people who have a certain perspective to take in that you couldn't do better back then. That was literally the best you could do.
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad that you brought up, and maybe I'm going too far, like naming like the societal factors and like oppressive forces and that we're all swimming in. But I I think, so many people when they consider, wow, maybe I do have to remove this substance from my life, what because of culture And frankly, because of a lot of like the AA narrative of like normies versus like people who, have an addiction, uh, that people are so afraid. I was so afraid that I'd be missing out, that I was going to feel deprived. I'm deprived of this thing. Other people get to do it, but I don't. And it was shocking to me that I didn't feel deprived. I actually felt liberated.
Mm.
It's like Holly Whitaker, who is the person, she wrote a book called Quit Like a Woman. I used to work for the organization she founded that since went under. That's a whole other story. But, um, she would talk about how it's not that I don't get to do this anymore, it's that I don't have to.
Mm.
And it was such a perspective shift for me, or it's like, I don't ever have to have a hangover again. I don't ever have to wake up with that cold slick of shame as a second skin, like just reminding me of what a piece of shit I was for once again going against my word. And, part of the way that I talk about recovery, and you can use whatever language you want. I like recovery, it doesn't matter, whatever works for whoever. But like, emerging from that is, I do see it as a rebellious act in a culture that kind of wants to keep us low key and aesthetized. So we just keep towing the status quo, the line of the status quo. And I think when people can see that for themselves, that it can be a liberatory process rather than a depriving one, that's where things start to open up. It's like, okay, who am I without this substance? How am I in groups? Do I even like my fucking friends?
Mhm.
So, yeah, like it can be bigger than the sort of, small hard thing that my life my life by the time I quit, it felt like it had gotten so small. And I was like, oh, like the ceiling lifted. It was such a relief. And I didn't have to fill it right away, but just to have that spaciousness return was, I felt like a baby bird. Like I just hatched and I was like, ooh, what is this miraculous world that I'm living in?
Yeah, I love that reframing, that it is a liberatory process. And from what you've been describing, quitting drinking, it like you said, you didn't really know who you were before. And when you quit, it gave you this space to discover that, to discover yourself, to discover who you really were. And, as you said, I think maybe reconnect, and maybe I'm connecting too much, but maybe reconnect with that sensitive kid,
Mm.
you know? And so I would love for you to share whatever feels, up for you to share about that reclamation, about that rediscovering yourself, uh, and what that process was like for you.
Mhm. Gosh, okay. So at first, the first year I was a non-drinker, I was still in a relationship, and I think we would have just kept plugging because there were a lot of ways that we were very compatible. So I think it was confusing for both of us that like certain things were just like not working. I think if I would have kept drinking, we would have just kept plugging along. So I got out, I ended an 8-year relationship that I thought was going to be, potentially for the rest of my life, and then moved into a house with friends. And for that first year, and it wasn't because I was like afraid I would drink or anything, but I had so many nights where I would get into bed at 7 p.m. like on a Friday night and just like, well, I don't know what else to do, so I'm just gonna go to bed. And and I'm in the world of self development and transformation, and I often, you know, there's so many parallels. My stepping away from drinking and like other people's, experiences of great change, which is the external horizons had to kind of shut down for me for a while as I explored what felt like a very new and transformed inner landscape. The metaphor I would use a lot is like it felt like there were these puzzle pieces that had been sort of floating around, were starting to click into place. And when I think about the sort of discovering who I am, it's been a process of developing self worth, of surrendering, loosening my grip of control on like how my life is supposed to be, um, relaxing into a greater sense of trust and how things are unfolding. And like, this is an ongoing process for me. I'm not like just trusting my life all the time, but learning how to do that and really putting it at the forefront. Human design has been really helpful for me in that way. And then um, another thing that really helped was reconnecting to creativity, owning an identity as an artist. I had sort of been like plugging along in the types of jobs that were just like sucking the life out of me. And then I finally was like, no, I'm going to focus on writing. And I went back to school for creative writing. And and then now have, over like the past handful of years, started to grow my own, like what feels like a very creative business. And then it was also just like learning like new skills of like how to take care of myself. And I'm still very much like, there's this sort of like inner world evolution, like the way that I talk to myself about myself, the spaciousness, the like reduction of worry and anxiety. Then there's like the skin, muscles, bones part of myself, like the way that I'm nourishing my physical form. Um, then there's, the people that I spend time with and, where I'm investing myself. And then there's like my home, my environment and, my where I live, all these things that sort of, when attended to, have given me like this sense of cohesion. That answer feels a little murkier for me, but yeah, it's like learning to treat myself with like friendliness.
Mm,
Yeah.
I love that. And like, I think that it's not like a linear process. It's not like a simple, here's what happens afterwards, and then you're gonna feel this way. Which
Oh my
I think,
God.
it's like, and it's also very individual.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone needs different things, and that's the hard part because we all like look online for some guru to tell us exactly what we need to do to feel better, to fix this problem, and people can inspire us, and people have inspired me. But at the end of the day, like, I have to figure out what works for me. And that's kind of what you were doing, by just being in your internal space, by going to bed at 7 p.m., it gave you this space to listen to yourself. And that just, paid, that's really worked out in a lot of ways for you, in ways some that are more intangible than others. But I just love what you ended on this, like, I feel more cohesion, I think you said. And it just makes me think back to you in college where there was the light you and the dark you, and that's like cohesion is such a word of integration for me. And I think that's what, you know, or that's just what I think of when I think of that process. And for me, I can just really, like, I hadn't thought of it all that way, but just like hearing you reflect on that, it just made me think a lot about like feeling more integrated as a person. And alcohol was just one piece of the puzzle in my process of doing that. But, I actually quit alcohol prior to doing an ayahuasca retreat. And then after the retreat, I never drank again. And yeah, and that was like, and like in the ceremony, ayahuasca was like, don't ever drink again. And I was like, okay. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to. And I think for me, it's been like a real like relearning of, I had a lot of social anxiety. I felt very uncomfortable around people. I felt very comfortable being authentic around people and being weird or different. And I was always trying to suppress that. So I would drink and try to be fun and outgoing and normal. But, not drinking has given me this integration of that part of myself that is a little weird or is introverted or may not say the right thing at the right time. And actually loving that part of myself, loving the part of myself that, is a little awkward, or loving the part of myself that is, not exactly always going to fit in or always going to say the right thing, or, and embracing what makes me a little different, which is very much my North Node in Aquarius vibes. I'm trying to embrace my weirdness.
Nice.
Yeah. And so anyway, I just really appreciate that reflection because again, like we're not offering here like perfect formulas to do things. It's not how it works. And like your honesty about your story really gives people like a sense of like it's a process. There's things you can take from it, but for everyone it's different. And there was something I was going to ask you, and then I totally slipped my mind. So I got too lost
Well,
there.
I mean, you said a moment ago about it's not linear, and like I was like writing this essay recently where I was like talking about like the stages of self-development, and I was writing it. I was like, yeah, there's like phases of it, but they're all sort of happening all at the same time, all the time. You're not moving from like A to B to C. Your A is happening, C is happening, like it's all happening at the same time. Like if I were to draw it's like a spiral that goes up and down, but it's also like lines going in every direction. Like that's the process we're in. And I think if that's a very helpful thing to accept, because you're gonna fail, you're gonna mess up, you're gonna slip. It's like, and that's part of it. It doesn't mean that something's wrong. You're doing it wrong. It doesn't mean you have to start over at day one, by the way. Um, and I think that can be kind of not as like a free pass to just like fuck around, but to just like know, like, oh yeah, every time that happens, I'm learning so much. And I've come to think of backslides, whether that's like someone, stringing together a bunch of days and then having a day where they drink, or like in, let's say, I always air quote it because sometimes the language sounds so pretentious, but like in like a self-development process, like you're making all these strides and like behavior change, and then all of a sudden you find yourself like, I find like backslides, they're points of integration. It's like your system is in this period of growth and expansion and learning, and it can't be there all the time. So then you come back and
Mm.
it's like this sort of familiar, comfortable thing. You're reflecting on what you've learned, and then you go back out. And this has been another helpful reframe for me when I do fall short, which I do because I'm a human, to be like, okay, like how do I take care of myself? Like so it's pointing me toward needing deeper care, right? Instead of shame, it's like, oh my God, wow, that sucks. Like, let's slow down.
Yeah. I love that because it just shows that it's not necessarily the things that happen, it is the perspective that you have on those things happening. And like I'm sure with with your clients, like that is such an important piece. Cause like, right, like you can have a backslide. And like it was funny because as you were saying that, I was thinking, I was like, well, I said I never drank again, but I had actually a couple times after that. And I'm like, why did I lie? Like, why did I lie about that? But I did at like certain weddings and stuff and experimented with going back for a period of time, and I didn't like it. But and I just think like maybe there is some shame there. But you saying this just now made me be like, well, I should just say that I did drink a couple times after I quit officially, and that's okay. I don't need to tell this heroic story about whatever my quitting. That's not really the point. And so I just really love that reframe. And I think the other piece I would love to dig into a little bit with you is, you know, it's clear, like, or just from what you shared, like spirituality, self-development, that has deep threads within you. And I'm curious how that has played a role in your recovery, your decision to quit, and what's come after. Like, yeah, yeah, if there's anything you want to speak to on that.
Yeah. What's coming to me right now is I had some experiences in my early 20s where like spiritual or like self-development type communities that I were a part of, like I saw the underbelly and I was like, oh, this is like, get me the fuck away from this. And I then the pendulum really swang in the other direction for me for a while, where I was like evidence based, like science, like everything, So my filter, and I think that that was necessary because I do think that I had to develop critical thinking skills more. Like I had to develop critical thinking skills. And now, in the past like 3, 4 years, it's like, it's both, it's like, I want to stay informed. I want to know about how things work. I want to know the science and the evidence. And there's also so many other ways of knowing that add so much richness, texture to life. And, you know, part of what I find so mystical and mysterious about a path of self development is that, I'm like following these steps, but like I'm following these new things and developing these new skills and like seeing progress and outcomes. But then there's this sort of mysterious aspect of it where it's like, what the, how is it that just by removing this one thing from my life, it gave me my life? Like, what is that? There's this mysteriousness to it. And, I think like when a scientist gets to the sort of like end point of discovery is the same fucking thing that like a spiritual practitioner gets to when they get to these like heightened states of consciousness. Like there's this thing that happens, and I want to like kind of be in the center of that. And so I think, yeah, again, like this integrating both the sort of critical mindedness and ability to sort of like know what you know information and all of that, but then also really lean into like the mystery of things. um that's what, like, forgive me for using this word, but it feels like the juiciness of being alive. It's like somewhere in between those two things.
Yeah. Living in between, like, I mean, I just think of like, you know, yin and yang kind of thing, the dark and the light, you know, like all these dualities that exist in the human reality. And we get caught up in going from one thing to the other. This is the right way, this is the wrong way. But the truth is in the paradox. The truth is in everything, holding it all at once, being with it all
Mm-hmm.
at once. That's what I think where like the magic and the richness of life can lie, where you don't need this single truth to exist. You can exist with multiple truths and hold them
Yes.
all. And I think that your story is such an example of finding that integration, and
Mm-hmm.
that finding that there doesn't have to be like, you don't have to fit into this specific box. You can actually exist as something more. Because when you were suppressing yourself, or when I was suppressing myself with drinking, I was like, oh, that part of me can't exist, so I have to cut it off and anesthetize myself. But then you can just bring it all into being, and it can all exist. You don't have to be any specific thing. You get to be whatever you are in the moment and change whenever you want, and just be a part of that process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. Really well said. And thanks for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know we're at time, but I really enjoyed this conversation, and the way that you articulate it is so beautiful. You're really like a wonderful storyteller. So I'm really grateful that you got to share this, and that you made time out of your busy day to share this with me. And I really got a lot from it personally. I just feel like you've integrated and articulated so many things that I knew but didn't have words for, about what that
Mm.
experience was like for me. So I'm really grateful to you.
Gosh. Yeah. And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you. Yeah.
Yeah.